Good evening and welcome to Tripping on Legends, our first episode of the new year of 2021. Happy New Year to everybody. I hope that you guys all had an amazing holidays. You all had an amazing New Year. You all made it through to the new year. I had a crazy 2020, as most people did, and it's been a kind of an insane journey. I wanted to, for those of you guys who are just new listening, or maybe just caught on, I've had a lot of new people on Instagram, so I want to welcome my Instagram people here on IGTV, as well as always my Facebook crowd. And then, of course, everybody listening in on midnight.fm, where it is always midnight. If you are not following me on any of those platforms, obviously you can become a midnight.fm subscriber if you want to listen to the archives of the shows I've done with them, as well as many other amazing shows. If you are following me on Facebook, or if you're not following me on Facebook, you need to subscribe to facebook.com/trippingonlegends. My IG is spooky tripping. On on Twitter, I'm actually at Spooky Balzano. I'm a little bit out of practice. If you are a fan of the show, if you are a follower of the show, you know I haven't done an actual live episode other than the Christmas episode, which was amazing, which is up if you haven't seen it. I haven't actually done a real live in front of the camera episode kind of discussing a specific legend in almost 2 months. It's been a while. I mean, they were showing old episodes, or they were playing old episodes on midnight.fm, but I had kind of taken a little bit of a break. And I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit because, oddly enough, the last couple days, I've gotten a lot of people on my different social media asking me about the book. And I'm assuming that they're not talking about Florida Haunted Love Stories or Haunted Florida Love Stories, which is out, and now you can get it anywhere. Makes a great Valentine's Day present in case you were wondering what to get for that person that you love who loves ghost stories. But also the Haunted Ocala book, which I had been under contract to write since probably early June, right? Maybe mid-June. And I was really excited about that project. That project is dead. So for those of you who are fans of the show, who have been following Haunted Ocala National Forest on Facebook or on any of the social media, for now that book is gone. There are many reasons for that. And I want to address one of them because it kind of leads into what I'm doing tonight. You know, when I left the paranormal, and I was a paranormal investigator at the time, when I left the paranormal, it was because I felt I didn't have a place in it. That, you know, what I do and what I did and where my passions were not necessarily in line with what the paranormal community was kind of putting forth. And that's no shot at the paranormal community. That's more of just my world and where I am and the way that I think. When I came back with Tripping on Legends, I was very specific in that I was not a paranormal investigator. I was not a ghost hunter or anything like that. I was a legend tripper. I was a person whose focus was finding a haunted legend in a town, in an area, and then breaking that story down, right? Going out, trying to experience what people were talking about that legend, but then also focusing more on the background of the story, why people tell it, what it means, things like that. The analytical folklorist moniker that I'd been given years ago. And that's what I was. And if you've read Haunted Florida Love Stories, it's kind of the baby of the first kind of 3 years of the show. And I'm proud of it. You know, it does have its mistakes. It does have its little bumps and bruises, little blemishes, but I like that book. And when I started to unwrap the Haunted Ocala book, it became, I jokingly called it JAG, Just Another Ghost Book. And I was not up for writing that. There are several reasons why I didn't want to finish the book. My heart was not in it. going through what everyone's going through in 2020. But also, I kind of felt like I was just rehashing what other people had been doing, even if it wasn't necessarily the same stories. I was writing the stories that everyone else, or how everyone else was writing them. It was becoming just another ghost book on the shelf. And I didn't want to, my passion wasn't in because of that, right? Like, I couldn't find a way to, I would literally freeze up when I wrote the book, when I would write the book. And I've got, advice saying, just do the damn book. And it's not that I don't feel passionate about the stories that are there, but I was dealing with, people's real experiences, which were amazing, which offered context to this bigger picture that I had of it. But it was not where my heart was. I was straying from the writer that I had kind of devoted myself and the person I had kind of devoted myself to being, and I had to get back to that. And along the way, other things came up, other things that had my passion more. And I kept putting those things aside for this. And I kept telling people, yeah, when I bury this book, and that was the expression I used all the time, when I bury this book. And you should not write a book when your thought of it is burying it. You know what I'm saying? Like, just getting it done. I couldn't do that. So I put it away, and with that, I kind of took some time to reevaluate. So like I said, I haven't been on since Halloween, I don't believe. So pretty much the entire month of November, and then December, we did the Christmas night show, which is a tradition, so I had to do that, and brought Ella in on that. But it was not, I had no desire to come in front of you guys with nothing, and where I was at that time, and so I stopped. I am thankful for Midnight FM for continuing by playing some old episodes, some classic episodes that their audience hadn't gotten exposed to unless they went back into my archives, because they were not ones that I had done live. They were ones from years ago. And if you're not subscribed to the show, right, and you want to hear, because tonight we're going to talk about some great cases that have happened over the past 4 years now. And it might be important to go back and listen to some of these episodes. I've put all of the notes and all the episodes that are kind of referenced. They're in the show notes tonight. If you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and hopefully leave a review while you're doing it, you can see the show notes to get some of these other websites and episodes to get kind of caught up to speed with everything, because there's a lot to unpack with this new project, but a little bit of a new obsession. If you know me, you know that I post plenty of pictures of my dry erase boards. I have a new dry erase board. So I now have 4 of them in my room, all of which are kind of devoted to this. So rather than great artwork or, a decent paint job, my room is covered in what looks like I've got to be trying to solve some kind of conspiracy theory. And in a lot of ways, this story is that. I want to start off by telling everybody, or by reminding everybody who's been a loyal listener to the show, but then also new people, that, while we have done this in the past, and while it continues to kind of touch upon this, this is not a simple Ghost of the Week kind of show. This is a journey. It's a narrative. The reason why I call this show Tripping on Legends is because we make mistakes, right? We make legitimate mistakes because it's all about trying to find the story, trying to find the legend, trying to find the relevance of the ghost story. And therefore, it's not just about, here's a story and here's the people, and boom, there's your ghost story. It is that, right? And the older episodes even reflect that more, that idea of, we talk about a haunting, then we go out and experience the haunting, we come back and we kind of, unpack it. But overall, Tripping on Legends is a journey. It's a narrative, right? It's not a story. It's not a simple story. It's a narrative. And tonight's episode is an amazing example of that, in that it's a story that maybe has a beginning, doesn't have an end, and I am asking for participation from the audience to help me not pull me out of that rabbit hole, Margie, stealing your line, not help me out of that rabbit hole, but rather go down it with me. Because there's some suspension of disbelief that goes into any ghost story. But this tale that I'm going to tell you today, which is an ongoing story, is going to ask you to kind of put aside what the definition of a ghost story might be and what the definition of a boogeyman is. And it's going to ask you to not only come along with me on the journey, but also trust me on the journey, right? I'll be scheduling trust falls after the show if anyone kind of feels the need to have it reinforced that, you know, you can trust me, but you need to understand that the story that I'm telling you is not only as true as I can tell it to you, but also that I don't really know what it means. And what it might mean is up to you, the audience. It's up to the people who have, will get some of the references that I say tonight. For those of you who then research, I love the fact that I posted something about this week, and about 7 people started giving me their Google results. Like, oh, here it is. I found this. For me, the story starts on Hog Island. And if you are familiar with the case that we did about the Swamp Witch of Hog Island, you'll know that in a lot of different ways we screwed it up, right? In a good way, right? If we hadn't screwed it up, I probably wouldn't be where I am right now. Natalie and I went out looking for a witch who supposedly, depending on which version of the story that you're going with, supposedly she had, the town had turned against her. They were loyal to her, they went to her for their remedies, and then for one reason or another, a lot of people think it had to do with the town failing or a disease that had hit the town. They turned on her and they killed her. They hung her in the woods. And in searching in that legend, if you've listened to that episode, you'll know that we, while we were there, probably would best be described as experienced a time slip. And little did I know that time slips were something that were inherent in locations around the Ocala National Forest. During that time slip, we were drawn to a tree. And in that tree was a noose. That noose has not been there since that day. I've gone out there 2 more times myself. Mark Muncy, researching his book, went a week later and the noose wasn't there. It was as if we were given that revelation. And it moved us. And if you're at that location, you can totally understand how the witch story probably came to be. And then in doing research, we discovered that it wasn't a witch. It was a lynching. And we found newspaper articles that kind of confirmed that these African-American men were brought into the swamp. It specifically says the swamp in that area. When I referenced that town, that area, Hog Island, I threw around different words to try to understand where we were. I threw around the word croon. I threw around the word bushnell. I threw around the word, the word that I absolutely love, withalahoochee. And I was contacted by someone who I consider a dear friend now, Della Daughtry, who essentially told me, you're an idiot. And that was okay. It was okay she told me that, because she opened up the can of worms, which is Pemberton Ferry. And I began researching this town that pretty much history says doesn't exist, right? Pemberton Ferry is a myth. But it's a myth that people are trying to forget, right? Whether it's because the Sumter County records have been burnt down, although they all haven't been burnt down, whether it's because people in that county don't want to talk about things, whether it's a government conspiracy, whether it's a huge movement by that evil force in Central Florida known as the Villages to wipe out the history of that area so they can pave it over for more housing. Pemberton Ferry became an obsession of mine, and I titled it "This Town is Myth," and it was an ongoing exploration because I don't know where that story's going yet. That story is unfolding as I speak, right? This what we're talking tonight is part of This Town is Myth. It's part of the mythos of Pemberton Ferry and of Sumter County. And when I look at it, especially as an outsider, when I look at it, I can kind of group Sumter County with Pemberton Ferry, right? They're not the same thing, right? If I had like Venn diagrams, I could show you, but essentially the story of Pemberton Ferry is pretty much the story of all of that area. And the stories that are being echoed in This Town is Myth are also the stories of Sumter County, or the lack of stories. I posted something, and a friend of mine, the good author Douglas Ford, said, "I don't get it. Why are you posting something that's evidence of a ghost that doesn't exist?" I kind of felt like, what do you call it? You can't handle the truth. What is that movie? Few Good Men, where, that other less famous line where he says, "I don't get it. You're submitting evidence of a flight that didn't exist." And oddly enough, we discovered that there is a ghost connected to that place that no one talks about outside of the county. And it's really interesting because there's a definite cutoff, right? When we're looking at Pemberton Ferry, we look at Brooksville, its sister city, or brother city. I don't know the sex of the cities. And Brooksville has a ton of ghost stories, right? And actually, I think we even referred to Hog Island as being part of Brooksville, even at one point. And they have a ton, right? We have the Brooksville Paranormal. We've got these amazing websites. We've got the Mayor Stringer House, like all these really good, interesting things that have to do with Brooksville. Spring Hill Cemetery. And then right across the river, it ends, right? Some really good examples of that. I talked about with La Hoochie. And that should be the most haunted location in Florida. It is the most deadly location. It's the deadliest location in Florida. So many people have died there that the locals just kind of gave it a nod of like, yep, don't go swimming at Iron Bridge. No ghost stories. No ghost stories about it. No evidence of ghosts, no people talking about seeing things on the water, and yet you follow that river up to Dunedin, and then all of a sudden you have the ghosts of the town when there was essentially a race riot, and they dumped the bodies into the river and let them float down into Pemberton Ferry, and that place is haunted, right? That place has ghosts, that has ghostly legends attached to it. Follow the bodies down the river, and the ghost stories end. You have a story like the ghost train of Pemberton Ferry. I have posted a link to that story, and essentially, this was a location in Pemberton Ferry that was known as being so haunted, these rough and tough like railroad guys refused to go on that leg of the trip because they were scared of the ghost, right? And then all of a sudden, boom, it disappears. Like with the town, the legend disappears. No one talks about that ghost train anymore. It was seen for a decade, but now no one talks about it. And so I became obsessed with this idea of, can we reverse a legend? Can we stop talking about a ghost story so much that the ghost story disappears? And that's what led me, continuing to work with Della, to an interesting case which, for all intent and purposes, has no ghost attached to it. I have researched this. I actually went out there and legend tripped it to some degree, a little bit this weekend, trying to gather evidence of it, everything like that, and was not able to find any information that there was a ghost connected to this case at all. And yet, for some reason, I was drawn to it, as people have been throughout the years. And that would be the case of Little Miss Panasoffkee. If you're not from that area, that name means nothing to you. But definitely as a whole name, Little Miss Panasoffkee. Panasoffkee is a lake that is in Sumner County. And Little Miss Panasoffkee is an unsolved murder where the body was discovered in that lake. So let's take a step back. There are a lot of unsolved murders in Sumner County. There's an active potential murder working right now that no one is talking about. Of all the cases that people talk about from that area, the one that they do mention, the one that's at least garnered some media attention, is the case of Little Miss Panasoffkee. On February 19th, 1971, so we are coming up to, in a few weeks, the 50th anniversary of the discovery of this body. A body was found in the weeds right off of 75, where 75 and the lake meet, the intersection of them, where it kind of goes under 75. A body was discovered. 50 years later, no one knows who that body belongs to. Over the years, it's been investigated, the case has been reopened. There's a lot that we know about this Jane Doe. We know that she's between the ages of 17 and 24. We know that she was between 5'2" and 5'5". We know that she had at least one kid. They think they can confirm that she had at least 2 kids. We know that she was killed sometime in mid-January. But she was so decomposed, she was so damaged, that even though they can say that she had these certain surgeries, even though they can say she had extensive dental work done, no one knows who this woman is. In 50 years, no one has ever come forward with an identification, kind of. No one has ever come forward to claim the body or to claim responsibility. I'm going to read something for you guys right now. And this is a description of what she was wearing. They originally thought that she was a Native American. The body was dressed in a green shirt, green plaid pants, and a green floral poncho. Also found were a white gold watch and a gold necklace. So she had on a gold watch and a gold necklace. So this is not, even though in some of the cases, in some of the research, they've said she was maybe a runaway or that she was, well, I'll get to one of the other possible identifications of her. On her ring finger, there was a gold ring with a transparent stone indicating that she may have been married. So here is a woman who had children, had a husband, in theory, right? She was wearing a wedding ring, what they thought was a wedding ring. She was wearing gold jewelry, so she probably wasn't a vagrant, right? Which is one of their original theories of it, that she was a runaway. Or if we're talking a 20-something, if we're talking a 19-year-old girl, a 20-year-old girl who's wearing gold jewelry and a wedding ring, who's had extensive surgery and dental work done, this is someone who is taken care of. This is not some hobo. I love the word hobo. We don't use it enough. It was originally featured on Unsolved Mysteries in October of 1992. So it got the treatment that it deserved. At that time, the new sheriff, Della, if you're with us, you totally have to tell me who the sheriff was, because I totally forgot to write it down. They showed the episode and they were, to some degree, obsessed with identifying who she is, right? So the case of Little Miss Panasoffkee is really the case of the science of identification, right? Over the years, she was dug up again in 1986. She was dug up again in 2012. They re-aired the episode in the late 1980s. I'm sorry, in the mid 1990s. They re-aired the episode of Unsolved Mysteries with updates. There have been, if you look this up, there have been multiple pictures made of her face and molds made of her face. As we've kind of evolved our ability to take evidence and decaying evidence and manipulate it and investigate it and break it down, she's basically been the test subject for a lot of this stuff. So if you look, there are at least a dozen different faces. And then, of course, they've aged her up and they've aged her down. So that in the hopes that someone can identify who this woman is. They always refer to her as a girl, but I mean, she is, a 17 to 24-year-old person. In 2012, where things kind of really picked up, they were able to establish, and I can't get into the science of this, nor do I want to. There's a reason why I'm a writer and not a scientist. So you're just going to have to take my word for this, that trust fall thing again. They were able to tell that she had suffered malnutrition because of the way her bones formed, that she had suffered malnutrition as a child. I think your tea is ready, Ella. And that she also, now here's the crazy thing, by analyzing the lead isotopes in her teeth, they were able to establish that she was from Europe. They were then able to establish that she was from Greece, and they even have the town from Greece that she is most likely from, right? So you have all this information. And my writing of that town is so horrific that I now have to go and look to see if I can... Laurium, Greece. So they aired the episode of Unsolved Mysteries in Greece. They did their own Greek episode focusing just specifically on the case. And a woman came forward. And this has kind of been excellent. Thank you. Sheriff Jamie Adams. It became his obsession when he became sheriff. Thank you, John. Of discovering who this was. And the Unsolved Mysteries episode is really kind of his, no connection, no pun because we're talking about Greece, his odyssey to discover who she was and to bury her the right way. Thank you, Ella liked that joke. She said her name was Constantina, and that she had grown up with her in this town in Greece, Laurium, and that they had been on a program where they went to America to become housekeepers. And it was kind of like an exchange program. And she went, I think, to California. Constantina went to Florida, and they lost contact with each other around the time that this body is discovered. So that's kind of one of the floating... Wow, that was a really bad pun. One of the ideas that's kind of out there. Along with that, or I guess this is kind of, a side of it, is this idea that, and if you've listened to our episode about the ghost pants, where we went to Tarpon Springs, or you know anything about West Florida, you know that Tarpon Springs is like a haven for the Greeks. It might as well be Greek town, right? You can get the best Greek food in Florida, in Tarpon Springs, and it's an area that, not pita pit, we're talking real Greek food. It's an area that really embraces that culture and those traditions. And so they have a huge Epiphany celebration every year. And so one of the theories is that this woman, whoever she is, came to America to experience the Tarpon Springs um, Epiphany celebration and then disappeared. Now, once again, the issue with that, with both of those, is that we're talking about, first of all, we're talking about a good hour away, right? I mean, it's not necessarily a short journey from Tarpon Springs to Sumner County. But also, it's kind of unrealistic that someone who is in Greece with their amazing Epiphany celebrations would come to Florida for Tarpon Springs, right? It's also kind of unusual that a woman would come to America on this work program through this company, and the company would never acknowledge that she had disappeared. That the family, I should say, never followed up with the company that she disappeared. Because keep in mind, she may have been married and she had at least one kid. But then also this idea that she was not dressed like a peasant. She wasn't dressed like someone who was a poor immigrant worker. I mean, she seemed to be dressed nicely. Now, you could say she owned these things. Maybe they were family heirlooms, especially if she was at the Epiphany celebration. Maybe she dressed up more, you know, and kind of went out with her best. Or we are 50 years in, and we are no closer to really coming up with an answer for who this woman is. And the other issue is no one can definitively say where she is, where she's buried. Now, I think I'm a little closer than I was even an hour ago to being able to answer that question, but I went out to Oak Hill Cemetery. So the rumor was that she was buried in Oak Hill Cemetery. Now, if you know anything about that area, I'll get to that, Margie. If you've been out to that area, Oak Hill is an African American cemetery. When we went out there, and I went out with Dell and her husband this weekend, she's not there, right? I searched that cemetery for an hour for either a headstone that said either Little Miss Panasoffkee or Jane Doe, 1971. Or what's always shown whenever you look at her grave or try to Google her grave or anything like that, this little plaque that just says Jane Doe, 1971. Neither of them were there. And I literally went to every single headstone and checked it out. While we were there, a friend of the main guardian, keeper of the cemetery, showed up because he was like, what the hell are these three white people doing in this cemetery? Essentially, it's kind of like what he kind of presented us with. And when we asked him whether or not she was buried and where she was buried, he's like, that doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, well, why doesn't that make any sense? It's because, like, well, why would they bury her in a black cemetery? Like, it doesn't make it, you know, why would they do that? There are all these cemeteries around here. And even if she was here originally for some reason, there's so much attention to the case, why would they keep her here? This is not a place for her, was kind of how it was presented. So we realized we were in the wrong place. We realized that this was not where she had been buried, but that's because, so this is kind of like where the twist of this part comes, there are 3 Oak Grove cemeteries. So it said that she's buried in Oak Grove. Everyone calls that cemetery, Oak Hill, Oak Grove, right? I literally have a picture of it, of the gate, and the gate says Oak Hill, and I'm like, we're in Oak Grove Cemetery, right? Because everyone knows it, because until the mid-1980s, it was Oak Grove, right? Then what happened was there's a rich kind of influential family in the area known as the Carruthers. They wanted to change the name of their cemetery to Oak Grove. And so they kind of forced out the African American cemetery, and they decided to call themselves Oak Hill officially, and this other one became Oak Grove. And so we think we might have found where this happened, and kind of mixed in with that confusion, maybe where these stories get mixed up, is that there's also a murder that took place. So if if Little Miss Panasoffkee was discovered in February of 71, in February of 72, there was another double murder in that same cemetery, in the cemetery where she was buried. And I think the distance from where the person worked and where the people came from, essentially they went to the cemetery to have sex, and they were ambushed, or they were discovered, murdered, left there. And I think over time, people kind of thought, because of the location of where it is, that it happened in Oak Hill, which would have been known as Oak Grove at that time, so that the stories have become intertwined, when really neither of them happened there. I'm still researching that part of it, because it's just kind of come up on it, because, you know, if a newspaper from 1972 says that they were murdered in Oak Grove, then it's not the Carruthers Cemetery, because the Carruthers Cemetery would have been the Carruthers Cemetery at that time. They hadn't changed their name yet. So there's still a little bit of diving I need to go on that. The basic point of it is, there's such mystery swirling around this Little Miss Panasoffkee case. And I understand the initial reaction is, we need to discover who this is, right? And it's kind of like, that's the part that you can potentially solve, or at least that's the mystery that engages you. Who is this girl? And everything seems to be revolving around who she is, and nothing involved in who killed her. And here's where my obsession with the case begins. No one that I can find online has put forth. There's one legitimate candidate who is said to have had sexual assaults on his record, and a kind of a sketchy history, and he looked good for it, but he was pushed off, right? They said it probably wasn't him. And I think he died a few years later, and so that as a legitimate candidate, and to be honest with you, from everything I've discovered, no one talks about who the suspects were. I don't know if there are suspects, right? I am a seeker of legends. I can only go so far in terms of what I know and what I can find out, and what I can put forth to people. And I have to admit, like, I'm a teacher, I'm a dad, I'm a podcaster, I'm a writer, blah, 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 blah. Searching through police records, getting police to talk is not my thing. It's not something that I've got skills in. I don't know how to file a Freedom of Information Act, and quite frankly, like, it's really hard to do in terms of, you know, mixing in with everything else I've got going on. Because, once again, excuse me, this is not a ghost story. But it might be. Because for me, the story here is not only that no one knows who she is, that we have not been able to discover who she is. It's not just that there seems to be no legitimate suspects that have been put forth in 50 years to the general people, to the masses. They might know. Sumter County sheriffs might know. For me, the question is, why has no one pointed the finger publicly in 50 years at the Boogeyman? Florida has its version of the Boogeyman. There have been men and women who have terrorized the state. there have been murderers and tyrants and all sorts of villains who have made Florida their home, or at least rampaged the area. To me, there's one that stands out. And the man who stands out is the perfect candidate for this crime, right? When I described what she was wearing, the thing that I didn't tell you was that she was discovered with a size 36 belt around her neck. Size 36 belt. Well, I guess I was that at one point. I'm a little bit bigger than that now. So we know it was a big man. We know it was someone who strangled their victims with, not with the hands, but with some kind of device. We also know that there is a boogeyman in Florida who has admitted to, depending on what source you look at, anywhere between 34 and 120 something murders, all of which were committed by strangulation, by hanging, all of which are, I should say, almost all of which he never served time for. And a man who is, in some ways, from his own creation, one of the least understood yet prolific presenters of himself and promoters of himself in the history of serial killers, probably. And that man is Gerard Schaefer. Gerard John Schaefer, I should say. And this figure, this man, is like mist. You cannot gather information about him and have it make any sense, right? Every time you think you have a handle on something, I have right here a document which identifies maybe a dozen, maybe a dozen and a half, maybe like 15, 20 of his crimes that he supposedly solved or committed. And yet, I had to put it in a spreadsheet because different sources say different things about different information. If you look him up on Wikipedia, what you're going to find is wrong information. If you read most of the books about him, you're going to find wrong information. If you go back and listen to Tripping on Legends episodes, you're going to find wrong information about him, including me consistently calling him Gerald. Gerald! Gerard John Schaefer was convicted of 2 murders. Only convicted of 2 murders. Despite what some internet sources tell you, he was convicted of the murders of Susan Place and Georgia Jessup in September of 1972. Their bodies, unlike what you might have heard in different, Wikipedia says it flat out, was not discovered in Port St. Lucie. They were not; those bodies were not discovered at the Devil's Tree. They were discovered on Hutchinson Island, which isn't even in the same county. It's in Martin County, where Schaefer was a deputy. He was a cop. I'm speaking about him a little bit in the sense that, like, you guys know the journey that we've taken with Schaefer on this show, and the reason why he's such a clear candidate to me. We discovered his name when we were looking at the Devil's Tree in Port St. Lucie, and when we went to the Devil's Tree, and if you haven't read up about that on my site or listened to the episode, you need to go back and listen to it. There is so much mystique that comes from it. The bodies that were discovered there eventually were Barbara Ann Wilcox and Colette Goodenough. And they weren't discovered until 1977. He committed that murder in January of 73. It's said that those murders put a curse on that land, or, depending on if you're a chicken or the egg kind of person, that the murders were committed there because there was something evil about this location. And if you go back and listen to that episode, we kind of go into that a little bit. This idea of the abandoned house that's on that property, the foundation, the stairs, which now have been said, oh no, that's where Schaefer lived. Schaefer didn't live anywhere near there. He lived with his mother in a trailer. All of these kind of ideas, the failed academy that's right there, the fact that they sold this property and then they couldn't sell it and they made it a park, that this is one of those areas that bad things seem to happen. Instead, what he did was he had originally tied them, these two women, Goodenough and Wilcox, to the Devil's Tree for a little bit. And then either when they were dead or when they're just about dead, he took them off a little bit, maybe I think it's 100 yards away, and that's where he killed them and buried them. And they weren't discovered for another 4 years. But the weird thing is, he committed that murder when he was on parole. Take a step back. In July of 72, as a cop, Schaefer picked up Pamela Wells and Nancy Trotter, 18, 19 years old, who had come from Iowa. One from Iowa, one from somewhere else. And they had been essentially hitchhiking. Schaefer picks them up, tells them, it's illegal to hitchhike in Florida. I could arrest you right now, that kind of thing. And no, please don't. And he's like, tell you what, I'll pick you up tomorrow and I will, I'll take you guys to the beach myself. So you don't have to hitchhike. You'll be safe. They agree, and then the next day, he picks them up, holds them at gunpoint, and essentially tells them, I'm going to kill you. This is what happens when you hitchhike. He hangs them from a tree on Hutchinson Island, hangs them from a tree, and then gets a call. A lot of what I'm telling you is part of the myth of him. There are different reasons why it says he left. He goes back and they're gone. He immediately tells his commanding officer, like, I made a big mistake. He's fired. He's brought up on trial, right? He's given parole. He's given bail, I should say. And while he's on bail, he commits the murders of Place and Jessup, which are almost identical to the attempted murder of Wells and Trotter. He commits the murder of Wilcox and Goodenough, and probably at least 3 other murders during this time that he is on bail. They find the bodies of Place and Jessup. He's then brought in. They search his mom's house, and what they find essentially is a treasure trove of trophies. This act, this search, connects him to literally dozens of murders over the course of 15 years. He's got driver's license, he's got jewelry, he's got teeth, he's got all these different artifacts, clothing from these victims, ranging from Nancy Leader and Pamela Nader to Goodenough and Wilcox. This Devil's Tree has got to be one of the darkest places I've ever been to. It's said that there are rituals that are performed there, that cults kind of surround the tree, that dark figures are in the woods. If you see the pictures of it, the tree is gnarled and kind of growing in this weird way. The tree is said to be indestructible. You can see where they've tried to burn it. You can see where they've tried to cut it. It's said that no saw will cut it. When we were there, we got some of the creepiest EVPs we've ever gotten. And some things we've never even really talked about that happened when we went to the Devil's Tree. Ridiculously, I took part of the bark from the tree. It said that if you take the bark, you'll be dead, right? Like that bad things will follow you. And bad things did. We were on our way to Casadega, and we never made it. The car had trouble. We couldn't find a place to stay. All these horrible things. And it wasn't until I got rid of that bark. And we went to a gas station. I filled up. I went to go throw away the bark. And once again, you got to trust me. The bark literally jumped out of my hand into the garbage. And then everything was good. On the way home, Natalie, and if you're a fan of the show, you've heard these stories before. On the way home, Natalie kept hearing a phone ring. Like a classic, like, ring, ring. She kept going, who's calling on the phone? Like, what's that? Neither of us had our phones set to a ringtone that would be anything like that. Natalie didn't know at the time, but that ringing phone is a classic signature of the beginning levels of obsession. Demonic possession. When we got home, as we both tried to sleep, we kept hearing whispers. We kept hearing this weird pan flute kind of music. That night and for the next week, we both had horrific nightmares. Now, I don't dream. I don't have nightmares. I've got like one nightmare, one dream that I have every 6-7 months. So to have a week where I'm having these lucid almost, and I wasn't on Channix, lucid dreams about the most horrific, evil things that I'm seeing. And Natalie the same way. It really messed Natalie up. Move forward a little bit. We've got the voice of Schaefer growling at us, talking to us, if he's at that location. Whatever is at that location. Months later, we visit Shiloh Cemetery. The links to all these stories that I'm telling you in more detail are in the show notes and also, on the in the social medias. We go to Shiloh Cemetery, where the legend involves a woman who was killed. Now, Shiloh's in Sandburg, so we're talking, I'm not sure if that's Lake County or what's right above, but it's that area, Ocala National Forest area. He's accused of the crime there. We have audio of two things. Well, a lot of things from that. That's, if you want to look for the episode, it's called Whispers and Screams from Shiloh. But the link is there. Almost constant chatter. An older man instructing a younger man kind of how to do things, like yelling at him for doing things the wrong way. We have an identical voice to what we got in the Devil's Tree, swearing at Natalie, saying really nasty things, some of which we couldn't even actually say on air, saying these to Natalie. And it's the same exact voice. It's the same exact growly voice that we heard at the Devil's Tree, that we heard at Shiloh. And I know what you're saying. I know the immediate thing is, well, EVPs are wrong, right? They don't even exist. But also the quality of an EVP, because of the recording, every voice sounds like that. Because you're picking out these lower frequencies. If you play them side by side, you feel as if you're listening to the same person. So now we believe that he is the man who was responsible for the legend and the murder that is involved in Shiloh. So now if we're looking at a map of Florida, he was in southeast Florida, right? Most of these murders are taking place in Broward County. They're taking place in Fort Lauderdale, places near Miami, Martin County. All of these places, Pompano Beach, these places that are the southeast Florida. Now we're talking central Florida. A year ago yesterday, I was at Lady Lake, tracking down a legend there. Tracking down a legend of a white woman who walks this road. Lake County is right next to Sumner County. As a matter of fact, it's funny, I said something today. The only people who know the difference between Lake County and Sumner County are the people who are in Lake County and Sumner County. Right? You don't even know sometimes on a road, it's like, when did I get into Lake County? Like, it kind of just flows. In the town of Altoona, two divers, Nancy Lettner and Pamela Nader, disappeared. Their bodies were never discovered. Now, it's unclear why, but authorities have essentially said, Schaefer did it, we have evidence that he did it, he's dead, we can't bring him to trial, but we consider the case closed. That was in October of 66. So we have October of 66, he's now in Central Florida. We don't know the date of the Shiloh murder. Those screams and growls that are from Lady Lake sound like the Schaefer case. They sound like his MO, and he was known to take two people at a time. He was big on that. As a matter of fact, he claims, because they spent time in jail together, he claims that Bundy told him, hey, I got the idea to do two at a time from you. The bodies rack up. And this is rolling around in my head. Because to some degree, I feel, even when we went to North Carolina, we got voices that sounded like Schaefer. I feel that to some degree, he has been the boogeyman of the show. That since that initial journey to the Devil's Tree, there's been kind of a Schaefer residue on everything I've done. And I feel as if it's something that needs to be exercised, right? That there's something about him that I'm supposed to intersect with. And it's not even like that far-fetched, right? It's not overly dramatic. I have, through evidence, through coincidence, through research, connected him to two other cases that Tripping on Legends has worked on that I didn't know going in they were connected to him. I have his voice on tape in multiple locations. And yet, this boogeyman has never been implicated in anything official that I was able to find into the murders of a woman who falls into his victim pool, 17 to 24. If I look at this, these are just the ages of some of his victims. 21, 20, 25, 22, 17, 24, 22, 13, 18, 19, 17, 16, 14, 13, 19. Then one he's suspected of, 9 and 8. That's kind of an outlier. This is his range. Women with long hair. Strangulation, right? I know I didn't get too much into the details of some of this, but, he's only convicted of those two murders. But in jail, he kind of became a courthouse lawyer, or a jail yard lawyer, as they say. And he was helping all these people out with cases. So he had access to a whole bunch of information. So he claims all of these murders that maybe someone else told him about in the process of. And let's face it, according to Schaefer even, these guys tell each other the details of their murders to get each other off. No kind of clean way to say that. But you look online and the information's wrong. You look in some books and the information's wrong. You look at other sources and they don't want to talk about it. You look at other sources and he's the most prolific serial killer of all time, right? You look at another source and it's like he only committed 2 crimes. Oddly enough, the crime that he's most famously known for, the ones that took place in the Devil's Tree, he refused to admit to. He admitted to everything else. He refused to admit to that. There are at least a dozen books that have been written about him. Plenty of websites out there dedicated to him. Probably the most famous of the Schaefer books was written. I can't believe I'm blanking on this. Lauren, I know that you're here, so you can help me out. Is it Chandra Jones? Who essentially published his fiction, which detailed his murder and his torture of different women. This book is really confessions. It's really, I've started to read it. I've been reading it while you guys were drinking eggnog and dancing around the tree and stuff like that. I was getting deep into the book called Killer Fiction, which is his disgusting and yet eloquent and yet horrific and yet psychologically intriguing account of these murders. Sandra London, thank you very much. And you can feel free to pop in when you want. I'm looking for something that points at Little Miss Panasoffkee, something that mimics those details, because he often wrote about his crimes and then she published them. You can't get a handle on it. And that's when this, for all that we know about him, we know nothing about him. He is the boogeyman, or he was framed by the Martin County Sheriff Department. He is a sweet and gentle man, or he is a guy who, at the age of 14, came under the training of a submissive who trained him to be a dominatrix. He is a self-torturer, or he's a torturer of women. He's Ted Bundy's best friend, or he's a man who Ted Bundy couldn't stand. He was murdered in prison in December of '95. Why was he murdered? Even in death, this man is myth himself. This man is a folk figure. Some say that he was going to say who had committed the Adam Walsh murders. Other people say that he had screwed over so many people in their court cases and become a snitch that they just need to get rid of him. Other people said this guy who did it was personally just pissed at him. It's impossible to tell the story of Schaefer without understanding that what we think we know might not be the truth. And to tell that story, because I have now become consumed with this idea. I knew that I couldn't do it alone. I knew that I wanted to tell Schaefer's story in terms of the ghost stories that are connected to him, in terms of this boogeyman, this figure who may be drifting in and out of these sites, that may be responsible for ghosts of a dozen different victims in different locations. But what the hell do I know about true crime? And so I thought I would bring in, for a new project, someone who I consider an expert in true crime, and that is Lauren Samples of Paradise After Dark. How are you tonight? Hold on a second here. I don't have you. Are you with me, Lauren? Hello, Lauren? Oh, she's calling back. Lauren, how are you? Nope, for some reason my phone is not picking her up. Lauren, are you with me? Nope, we're having trouble. All right. Lauren, you can try to call back in. I'm going to kind of explain what I'm doing here and what the project is, and you can kind of try to call back. But I wanted to do, so here's kind of the reveal. I wanted to do a major podcast, and not the podcast like I'm doing right now, but like a scripted, formalized, limited edition joint venture between Lauren, are you with me?
To accept, press 1. To send a voicemail, press 2. You
gotta love this stuff. Love technology.
To accept, press 1. To send a voicemail, press 2.
All right, are you with me now? Lauren?
Yes.
All right, are you with me?
Yes.
Beautiful. How are you?
I am with you.
Introduce yourself.
Way behind.
Introduce yourself to those people who don't know about what you do.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Lauren, and I am one half of Paradise After Dark podcast. We cover true crime, unsolved mysteries, missing people, and some urban legends in the state of Florida.
And I've been on that show a few times. You guys have always been gracious.
Yes, we did the Creation Unity, and then what did we do? What did we just do? I can't remember.
I think it was just, a night of love stories, haunted love stories.
Oh, you're right. It was haunted love stories. That was our
Halloween. And Lauren is someone who, every time I think of a true crime thing, she's the first person I go to because she is an amazing researcher. If you have not listened, if you're not listening to Paradise After Dark, and every time I say that, I want to go dark, 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 but I'm not going to because that's not my gig, right? Every time I listen to that show, I end up doing probably about 2 hours of research about what you've researched and following in your footsteps. But then when I think of something, recently you and I were in contact with a lot of the disappearances and murders of females in the area. We were kind of going back and forth with this. And immediately I thought, wouldn't it be amazing to have a podcast that crossed the true crime aspects of Schaefer with the legend of Schaefer? And I knew the project was too big for me, so I brought you in.
Yes, and I'm on board 100%. I think it's going to be a very interesting and intriguing project.
So going in, I know that you know a little bit from me, but going in, what do you know about Schaefer?
Not a lot, honestly. I've had extensive conversations with Chandra Jones about the Gainesville Ripper, because she's an interesting character, and I wonder if we can't get an interview with her for this. But she was actually engaged to Schaefer at one point, and then she was engaged to Gainesville Ripper later on in life.
And what do you remember his name? Is it Manny something?
Oh gosh, it's slipping my mind right now.
Right.
I have so many serial killers in my brain.
I know.
But I don't know much about Schaefer. The first time I ever even heard of Schaefer was when the first time I met you,
right,
and you brought him up. And basically, the Wikipedia page, the Murderpedia page, that's as far as I've gone so far. I've actually already gone to Sumter County and requested all of the reports and supplemental reports on Little Miss Panasoffkee. So I'm on that.
That's why I brought you in. How did you do that? Did you do that today?
I did that just after we talked earlier this evening.
You're amazing. So you haven't even told me that information yet, what you found.
Oh, no, I haven't found anything. I just went to the sheriff's office and requested
it.
the files. Yeah, like Freedom of Information Act and all that stuff.
So this is the stuff that not only do I not have the knowledge of how to do, but I also am a little bit of a chicken to do that kind of stuff because I've had some horrific run-ins with law enforcement having to do with some of the books I've written. And so I'm like, I'm scared to talk to police. So your knowledge is going to be important in this.
Yeah, well, usually if you tell them that you're media, which is why we actually started a media LLC, and they work with you a little bit better if you say, hey, we're media.
Right. So the idea behind this is that, and we haven't ironed out everything yet because we're kind of at the beginning levels of this, but we really want to throw our hat over the fence and announce it, especially with me coming back this week. It's going to blend these true crime aspects and the ghost stories that are attached to them, because a simple thing, I looked up, there are 4 different dates given just for the Wilcox Goodnow murders, right? There are conflicting reports about the evidence list that was found in what was found at his mom's house for evidence and what it pointed at and the murders it pointed at. He has gone on record saying that 34 is a really good number for how many people he killed, and yet sued people for calling him a serial killer.
Right.
He's admitted to over 120 murders, and then said that he did absolutely nothing. So everything about him is confusing, you know? And so how do you sift through all that? How do you... And this is part of the reason why I wasn't able to get into a lot of the crime stuff having to do with the Ocala National Forest is, how do you start to tackle that stuff? So when you're presenting your cases, and if you're not listening to her show, you need to. When you were presenting your case, how do you get to a point where you say, I feel comfortable putting this idea forward or this evidence forward as something that I feel comfortable or I feel confident is truth to your audience?
Well, we are really big on getting the actual police files and police reports. We have boxes and boxes of police reports and discs of 911 calls and just a crazy amount of stuff that the average person would think that we are not, that we actually have all of this. Well, you've been in our studio.
I've been in the pad, yes.
We decorate the walls with police reports.
Yeah, so if you think my bedroom with my dry erase boards with my information is crazy, you need to see where her and her husband Kenny, right? Or Kenneth, I should say.
Kenneth,
yeah. Ken, where they record their show. And their setup is so much nicer than mine. I think I wanted you in just so I could have good equipment.
You what?
I think I wanted to do a project with you just so I could have good equipment. Because your recording equipment is amazing compared to mine.
Well, we've been at it for about 3 years now, and we started, scratch. Started with nothing.
Yeah.
We had gaming headphones, no mixer, and so we really put a lot into building what we have. And but back to your question. I try very hard to get as much of the actual facts, court documents, police documents. A lot of times, if it's an unsolved case, they out that information.
Right.
So I have to kind of, do some footwork and get out there and try to. I do a lot of speaking to the victims' families and going that route. And basically, there's some news sources that I do trust, and there's some news sources that I don't trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll, try and get some information there. And then you always got to credit where your source is in the podcast world.
Yes, you do. Unless you're lore, yes, you do.
So.
And one of the things I really like about what you guys do is, if the case is big enough, you'll go 4 episodes with it. It's not like you try to fit it into a neat little package. It's like, no, like we have to do more for this one. So join us next week where we go into step 2. And I don't think I know any other podcast that's not one of those big, uber big, highly produced podcasts that has more of the victims' families in, right? Like these victims' families, you become friends with them. Like they come to you to tell their story and to follow up with you.
Yeah, they do. And I don't even know how or why that is. I'm very active on social media, and when I see someone, I've reached out myself and said, hey, can we help you? But then I've also had people reach out to me and say, hey, can you help us? And I never turn anyone down.
Right.
No matter how small the case is. There's a lot of cases we've covered that I feel have been not prioritized due to the victim's lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on one right now, actually, where that's the case. Just because somebody is an addict or whatever their lifestyle is, they're still a person, they're still murdered, and we run into a lot of police departments not really prioritizing these types of individuals, which pisses me off, frankly. And so we do a lot of that, because we have these families that are like, help.
Right.
And that's my goal.
And it's
that's my only goal with this podcast is to help.
And it's so hard to present those things of a sensitive nature on the podcast because you oftentimes, I'm thinking about the woman here in Cape Coral where I am, who still hasn't been found. That was your cue to drop her name because I can't remember her name. The girl in Cape... Thank you. That was a tough episode to unpack because she wasn't the ideal victim. You know what I'm saying? She wasn't the ideal person, and yet you had to kind of get through all that to be like, this woman is missing and she's a mother, So it's tough sometimes on those cases.
Right. Yeah, it is. With that one in particular, it was difficult because the family wasn't pleased that we, put out the information we put out.
Right.
To the point where we actually took it. We took that episode down.
Oh, did you really?
We did. We tried to help, and if you don't like the way we do it, then if you don't want it out there, we'll take it down, no problem. But
that's unfortunate though, because that was good work by you and Trouble After Dark, Trouble in Paradise.
Trouble in Paradise.
Yeah.
That was their thing. They kind of did the same thing that you're doing now. Is they latched onto that case, but they don't really focus on true crime. So they came to us and said, hey, let's do this. And we did it relatively quickly. Like we put it together in like 2 days, and I know that Nigel had reached out to me, and I was under the impression that the family was, cool with it. But then after it was done, they didn't like, the fact that we brought up her past, and which I think is very relevant in her disappearance. That's the thing. Sometimes sometimes people don't understand that definitely the past used in a missing person's case. So.
Right. I mean, it's, and
It's a
with
slippery slope.
and with these, with what we're going to explore, it's confusing to me in that we're going to be looking at cases from 50 years ago. We're going to be trying to make sense of these. We're going to be trying to open up, and we still haven't completely figured out the format of what we're going to be doing, but we're going to be opening up some old wounds, and we're going to be opening up and maybe coming into contact with some very litigious people. Schaefer sued everybody, including Chandra, right? Several times. It's very hard to find a book that's written about him that doesn't begin with an intro, and I've been looking into this stuff, that begins with, let me tell you first about how Schaefer tried to sue me, before it gets into kind of launches into what's going on. One of the things that I've already started to encounter in doing this, and I'm interested in your view on this because you get into this a lot more than I do, is staring into the darkness and having the darkness stare back. How do you ground yourself as you do these things, as you do these shows? How do you go through all those police files which have graphic descriptions, which might have evidence photos, and keep your humanity? Okay, because I'm reading killer fiction, and I, even if my kids are asleep while I'm reading it, I feel guilty for having those words on my screen.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? How do you come to terms with that yourself? I bet I know your answer. I can answer for you because I think I know you well enough that I know what you're going to say, but go ahead.
What do you think I'm going to say?
I think you're going to say it's about the victims. And that's the light at the end of the tunnel, and then you have to kind of get through that darkness to help that light, to find that light.
You are correct. It is. I pushed through. It is not pleasant by any means, but I do push through, particularly in these unsolved cases, because, like I said, my goal is always to help. Even if I could just reach one listener who might trigger a memory, or it might, pull at a heartstring and get someone to come forward with information. But I'll have to tell you, I mean, if you want to get deep into it, 2019, we did a case about a 14-year-old who killed his parents, and I was so upset and disturbed after doing that case that we had to take a break. We took about 6 weeks off, and I even put it on. So I'm completely open and honest with our listeners, and I told them on social media, look, I have anxiety, I'm having trouble sleeping, I'm having nightmares, I need to step away for a while, and that's what we did. And fortunately, I haven't had another case bother me that bad ever since then, but it really does get to you sometimes.
Yeah.
And
I think what we experienced when we went...
You have to compartmentalize, I guess.
Yeah, and which is hard because you want to put your heart and your soul into it and everything like that. I'm going to have to let you go because we're about to go off the air on Midnight FM. But Laura and I will be back. We will give you updates on what's going on. And as we go, so her podcast again is Paradise After Dark. You can find it everywhere, right?
It's available on all platforms.
And if you follow my social media, you're going to get to her social media, or I should say their social media, because I repost as much of their stuff as I can. So, Lauren, thank you very much for coming in tonight.
Absolutely.
All right, we will be in contact. All right, thank you very much.
All right,
bye-bye.
Bye.
So we're just about done here. I want to thank Lauren from Paradise After Dark for coming in. This is an ongoing thing. This has not been structured yet. This has not taken complete form yet. It's just one of those... if you're with me, hashtag follow the sign moments where I have to follow this story down. I have to look into and follow my instincts on this. Schaefer has been someone who has been a shadow over everything that I've done, everything the show has done for 3 years. And we need to, there's something compelling me to continue with this journey. There's something that's telling me there's something down this rabbit hole. There's something on this yellow brick road, and I need to go. And I'm glad you guys are coming with me. When we come back next week, we'll go back to the good old ghost stories, good old legends. But until then, you can follow up with this episode, some of the stuff we've talked about on our social media. At Facebook, we are at facebook.com/trippingonlegends. On our on Instagram, we are at Spooky Tripping, Spooky Balzano on Twitter. And you can call our number anytime if you have any details about this or anything else at 813-418-6822. And we are on every single, in addition to being on every set platform other than Spotify, we are on Midnight.fm every Tuesday from 8:30 to 10 o'clock. So for me, for my silent partners and not so silent partners, Della and Lauren, my name is Christopher Balzano, and here's hoping that all of your trips are legendary.